Everyone, welcome. I'm Pamela Anderson, ISV and Alliance Partner Communications Lead. I want to welcome you to our DevTalk webinar today. Today, our presenter, Ian Hutton, will demonstrate how you can leverage free GenAI tools to rapidly create a simple but functional web-based application for printing labels. A few quick notes before we begin. The session is being recorded, and all of the DevTalk webinars can be found on the YouTube channel 3 to 5 days after the live event. And also, just as a reminder, everyone is muted. And if you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A panel in Zoom, and we'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. We do offer translated captions for you. So if you'd like translated caption, just click the More button at the bottom of your screen, select Transcript, and then select your preferred language. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ian. Ian Hutton, our pre-sales consultant at Zebra, which will be presenting for you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Just, okay. So if you can just confirm you can see the first slide. Can you see that, Pam? Okay, thumbs up, thank you. So hello and welcome. Thanks to everybody for joining wherever you are in the world. My name's Ian Hatton. I'm a pre-sales consultant for Zebra in EMEA and based in the UK. And my topic today is how we can use Enterprise Browser to create print-enabled demos in conjunction with the GenAI tool, which is doing most of the legwork. So without further ado, I'll go on to the first slide. So most people are probably aware that there are many options for generating code, either through a chat interface or using a vibe coding tool such as Cursor. Most of what I've done has been through a chat interface, and that works okay for my purpose, but I think you could use other tools as well. Basically, this technique is completely independent of the tool that you use. So we could, in theory, take code generated in any way from any GenAI tool and still include the Enterprise Browser APIs in order to support printing. Now for these demos, or this demo in particular, we're going to generate a single page HTML and JavaScript app. That just makes it simple from the point of view of demonstrating the idea. You could build a bigger application and add the same APIs to support the printing. And I think you'll see, hopefully, when we get to that section, that the APIs are pretty straightforward and quite minimal in order to do Bluetooth printing, which is what we're covering here. So if you're interested in this in general, I also did a previous session, and there was I think an associated DevTalk where we did a similar process but added RFID and barcode support via Data Wedge. So again, if you're interested in those two alternative input methods, then have a look at that blog and also the associated DevTalk. I think we've got an audience poll, so I'll just stop share. And Pam, if you want to share the poll. This is just to gauge within the audience how many people are using GenAI, what kind of tool you're using. It's just for our general information, just to get an idea of how widely it's being used currently within our partner and customer base. I think it's probably long enough, Pam, for the responses. Don't know if you can show the results. Okay, so we got.
There we go. Those are the results. So
interesting. They're roughly 50-50 split between people using it and not. And within the people who are using it, that 50% got the majority using ChatGPT, and then smaller numbers using Gemini, DeepSeek, and so on. Yeah, interesting. So it looks like most people are using a chat interface anyway. Let me just go back to my slides. So yeah, in my testing recently, I've been using ChatGPT mainly. And what I've noticed is that with other GenAI tools, like, for example, DeepSeek, you get a completely different UI. So the ChatGPT UI is very plain and minimal, whereas the DeepSeek generated UI is much richer and therefore more verbose in terms of the code it's generating, especially the CSS. So you can make the choice between whichever tool you prefer to use. I think for a customer demo, it could be nice to have the richer UI. The other advantage with DeepSeek in particular is it's got a much smaller carbon footprint, which is one of the issues with Gen AI or AI in general moving forward. So I think that's a good benefit. But as I said earlier, you could use whichever tool you prefer. For this demonstration, we can use ChatGPT because of the smaller code it's going to generate. As I said, other command line tools are available. I haven't really tested them extensively, a little bit with Gemini, but not with the others. So yeah, just whichever works best from your own perspective. So in this demonstration, we're going to create a simple web app which will generate a sample database of patients. So this is a hospital application where you need to ID an incoming patient. And the idea here is that we can scan or enter a patient ID, which it checks against the database of known patients. And if it's found, then it will display the details of the patient, which you can see on the right-hand side. And then if you hit the print label button, it will print a corresponding label with a barcode containing the patient ID. So it's just a simple application just to demonstrate the idea of printing a label. But when we build this application, what the GenAI is doing is basically creating the code, but also creating the dummy data, which it's pretty good at. So if you ask it to create a sample database, it will use some random names and addresses and date of births and blood type and so on. So you don't have to think about that, which I think is useful. And also, in addition to that, it will generate the ZPL required, because in these demonstrations, we're creating from Enterprise Browser a direct link to the printer over the Bluetooth interface. So we're actually going to print raw ZPL, which is the easiest way to print a label, and is actually my preference to do it that way. And yeah, GenAI will do that pretty well in terms of building a usable ZPL label format. So yeah, that's what we can do. The app's hosted in Enterprise Browser, which is a Zebra product. You can get more information at that link. And it provides a rich set of APIs for JavaScript, which you can access at that link on our TechDocs website. Enterprise Browser is a licensed product, so it's currently approximately €30 list price for one device per year. And it's a freely available download from our Support Central, which is support.zebra.com. And that will work with full functionality, but it's got a frequent mag screen when it's unlicensed. So if you don't have a license, it will pop up a screen to tell you that frequently while you're using it. Apart from that, it's fully, it's not restricted in any way. So for convenience, I've made some samples using this technique, including this patient ID app, and you can install them through the StageNow barcodes. So if you're using Android 13 or later, use the left-hand JavaScript format. And if you're using Android 11 or earlier, use the XML format. And that will install Enterprise Browser together with a demo launcher, as you can see on the screen here, which allows you to select between different demonstrations. So we're not going to look at these in detail, but there's the patient ID, which we're looking at here. There's a paramedic checklist, which is basically the idea being that you would have, if you're a paramedic, you have a kit bag of equipment, you go out to an emergency, you come back. It's quite often could be the case that you've left some equipment that you need for your next call out. And this would just allow you to scan the items you have in your kit bag in order to check them off a list to make sure you've got what you need or to identify what items are not in the bag. So it's simple. It's more useful if you use it with RFID than with barcode, but in this case, we're just going to use barcode to check the items off. There's a mobile POS simulation where we're doing point of sale, where you can scan barcodes and add them to your basket. And in that demo, we're just printing a label with the receipt, basically, what you purchased. There's a visitor badge application, which allows you to enter a name and a company, and it will print a visitor badge containing that information and a barcode. And there's also a weighing station app, which was basically a simulation of the situation where in a supermarket you have fresh fruit and vegetable produce, you need to weigh it and generate a label to put on that item in order to take it to the checkout. So it's just that kind of application where it prints a label that you can stick on a package or a bag that you've put the items in. So yeah, to install those, just have a pre-configured internet connection on your device and then read one of those barcodes in StageNow. And just to run through the basic steps to generate the code, we're going to see the main requirement here is that you have a good description of the application. So the prompt that you create is key in order to get a usable output, which is, I think, is the same in using GenAI chat tools in general. The output's only going to be as good as the input definition. So you have to spend some time to make a concise description of the application. Some of that is trial and error. So you'd be quite lucky to generate a working prompt in the first instance, but with a few kind of iterations of the prompt, you can get something that works pretty well for the requirement that you have. And it certainly would be quicker than actually starting from scratch to build the application, unless you happen to be an absolute wizard at HTML and JavaScript, which definitely in my case I'm not. So this is doing most of the legwork for me in terms of building the application. And as I said, making the ZPL corresponding ZPL label format. And once we've built the application, basically what we're doing is it's an app which will run directly in a web browser on a PC, so we can test it on a PC first. Once it's working, then we can merge in the Enterprise Browser specific APIs to support Bluetooth print connection. So that's just outlined there. So we submit the prompt to the chat interface, copy or download the result as HTML, test the app first in a browser. We can also check the ZPL label format with labelary.com to confirm that it's working as expected. So that's a really nice tool for previewing raw ZPL. You can see here the ZPL, and you can also see the output there. What I've found is in most cases, there will be some tweaks required to ZPL because it will do things like incorrectly position the barcode, which could be over here by default when you generate the code, and you just need to adjust the parameters to push it over or to reposition it so that it's not overlaying some of the text. So it's that kind of issue needs to be tweaked or fixed in most cases, in my experience. But it certainly, from my perspective, it's quicker and easier than building the design in, say, Label Designer and then exporting it. I think this is a more direct method of doing it. One also note about this Labelary website is when you have a label format loaded in this panel, it's not showing on this screen, but you can just hover over a command and it will give you the syntax of that command below. So it will tell you exactly what that command is doing and what the parameters are. So that's also useful if you're not familiar with ZPL. It really helps to understand what it's actually doing in terms of the label formatting. So when everything looks good on the desktop browser, you can add the Enterprise Browser Bluetooth print APIs by merging the contents of a JavaScript file that I've extracted as a separate print support file that you can see there, or you can see the file name. There is a link to download that in the presentation and in the corresponding blog that I posted on this method. So you can access that file rather than having to create it. But it just contains the Enterprise Browser print APIs and a few includes that you need to make. So yeah, we run through this in more detail, but basically you copy the Enterprise Browser header includes into the head section. There's a status div that we're using to return the status of the print connection, which you just put into your UI in an appropriate place. And then you copy all the functions from the script section of the JavaScript file, this one here, and you paste them into your application. And once you've done that, then you'll have the option to call either function name Bluetooth Connect Printer Insecure, if you want to establish a non-paired Bluetooth connection, or you can have Bluetooth Connect Printer Secure, which gives you a paired Bluetooth connection. So you can choose which one to use. I think this one is very straightforward. It doesn't need to have any pairing, so you don't have the issue whereby over time you get a lot of devices paired and you need to clear the pairing list. If you're sharing printers between multiple devices. So the non-paired connection can be more straightforward and easier to maintain. But the paired Bluetooth connection is better security in that you have to confirm the pairing on the device in order to establish the connection. So anyway, you have the choice between the two. They're both working in pretty much the same way. Once you've made the connection, there's a function called BT write, which will basically write the ZPL to the printer, and then you can optionally call Bluetooth disconnect, BT disconnect, in order to disconnect the connection. So I say optionally because if you leave the connection open and then just exit from Enterprise Browser, it will close down and remove the connection anyway. So yeah, once you've made those changes, check the app still loads in the desktop browser, which confirms that you haven't got a basic syntax error, like, for example, mismatched brackets, which is quite easy to do in mismatched curly brackets, which you can do quite easily in JavaScript. Configure the app as the Enterprise Browser start page and copy the config.xml and HTML to the enterprise/device/enterprise browser folder, and then start Enterprise Browser to check the correct operation. So just to demonstrate that, I will just drop out of the presentation and show you my PC. I've got a sample set up here for the patient ID. This is the version that's been generated unmodified. So this is what's been generated through ChatGPT. And here I can just enter a MAC address, doesn't matter what it is. And I can enter a patient ID, which in my case is actually a 24-digit ID. I just edit the code, show you the default patient IDs are starting with 1 and incrementing by 1. Okay, they're not actually listed in here. So it's generating them automatically, but sometimes what you see with GenAI, sometimes it will change the method it uses to generate code. So sometimes the ID numbers are actually in the data structure and you can just copy and paste them, and sometimes they aren't. So in this case, it's not define them as a kind of static variable. So basically to test it, I can just enter a value. So it should be 24, and then you can see if I copy that and paste it and increments it by 1, it gets a different patient each time. There's 10 patients in the database. So if I do print label, it doesn't do anything. I think by default, if I was to enable the debug tools, developer tools, you should see the ZPL coming out here because it's just printing it to the console in the generated code. So if you want to check the ZPL format, you can just copy that code, go to labelary.com. It's here. And then go to the label viewer, clear the default sample, paste in the code and redraw. And you can see that's the label format. So that's how you check it. And the syntax I was talking about earlier, you can see there, I just highlight any command, show me the syntax and tell me what it's doing. So yeah, basically that's a working sample. So what I can do to modify that, and this is a modified version of that, I just basically need to add from my JavaScript file, I've got the 2 includes required for the Enterprise Browser APIs. I need to add those into the head section. I've then got a div, which I need to add into my HTML code, which you can see I have put in somewhere here. I can't quite see at the moment. Where is that? Print status, that's that one there. And then I just need to copy and paste the print functions into the module, which you can see at the bottom here. So that gives me the availability of the print functions. And then I call the print connect after I've entered the MAC address. So this is where the MAC is being entered. And once that's been entered, then I have the call, in this case, to Bluetooth Connect Printer Secure, passing the MAC address that's been entered. So that gives me my paired printer connection to the Bluetooth printer. And when I need to print the label, so this is the ZPL that's been created, is being passed to the BT write function, which is going to print that to the connected printer. So it doesn't matter whether you've connected to the insecure function or the secure function, it's the same function to write the data to the printer. So yeah, and that's basically it, those 3 steps. So add the headers, add the div for the status, and then add the functions. And the 4th step, modify the code to call the appropriate connect function and the write function. And if you want to disconnect the printer, then you just call the Bluetooth disconnect function. It doesn't need an argument. So once you've done that, you can just take that sample and the config.xml, which is already modified to point to that as the start page. And I can send that to my device. So these shortcuts I've covered in a blog, again, posted on the developer portal. So if you want to use any of these, then just reference that blog. I can use this shortcut to copy those files to the Enterprise Browser path, which is this one. And I've got a TC501 here. And if I now show you the screen of the unit and run Enterprise Browser, then you should see that sample will be loaded. got my ZQ320. I can just scan the MAC address of the printer, does the connection to the printer, which is the paired connection, and then I can just scan the patient ID and select print label, and you can see there each time I click print label, printing the label. So it's really straightforward. It's only a few lines of code, and I think it should be, there's not too much scope for it going wrong, but obviously things can go wrong anytime, but I think it's, simple enough that you can add the print code pretty easily. If you need more details, as I say, there is a blog that I posted on our dev portal, which you can access through the link here. So if I just follow that link, you can see it's going to go through that technique in a bit more detail. It also includes the download link for the JavaScript include, which is on a Google Drive link. So you can just click that, and hopefully, whether you have that blocked on your network, it should allow you to download that and use it. Useful technique I think for quick customer proof of concept and demos. So it does have some limitations in terms of the complexity of the apps which you can generate, which you need to be aware of. If you were to try and generate a complicated app with a very long prompt, firstly, it will take quite a long time to process it, and it probably then will ask you to license or have a log on to ChatGPT and to use a license tier. But when you've got that kind of prompt that we saw earlier, then you can see that we didn't actually do the generation, but I can tell you that it doesn't take that long. It's normally generating it almost immediately. It just takes a while for it to actually show you all the code, because it's doing the kind of typing as the output. I wouldn't try and do something too complex, but for a quick demonstration or proof of concept, it works well. Capability of the code generation is likely to evolve significantly over time because of the rate at which this kind of technology is evolving. I think the capability probably in a year's time will be significantly greater than it is now. And you could use it, I think, for a production grade app if you wanted to actually build a customer app. If it was a fairly simple, straightforward one, you could do that. You probably wanted to add some additional error handling, because the error handling at the moment is pretty minimal. It will give you a printer status returned. If it can't make the connection, it will give you an error message. But there's no automatic retry of the connection currently, so that has to be done, by the user manually. So that whole side of the error recovery could be improved, over and above what is in the demo currently. And that is pretty much it. I think I've covered the material I wanted to cover. So I think, Pam, we can open it up for questions.
We do have some questions. So one question came in through the chat, and the question is it possible to capture some event like soft keyboard to appear?
So if I understand correctly, then can you make the soft keyboard appear?
Yeah.
Within Enterprise Browser? And the answer is yes, you do have some control over the pop-up keyboard. There is an API call. So if you go back to the tech docs reference for Enterprise Browser and you look at the API list, one of the APIs does cover the SIP. You can see there. So you can try using that. I think in my experience, that does work for Gboard. Certainly works for Enterprise Keyboard. Using that, it was mainly designed for use with Enterprise Keyboard, but I think it will also work with Gboard if you're using that as the soft keyboard. So yeah, have a look at that link you can see there, and that API should be usable for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ian. The next question that we received was, can this technique be used for other types of printer connections, such as Wi-Fi and USB?
So the short answer is yes, it can. We have discovered an issue with supporting the USB connection in the current release of Enterprise Browser. That will be fixed in the next release. So if you need to do USB connectivity, you'll need the forthcoming release, which I think is due fairly imminently. But basically, yeah, with the API set, we also have a API for printing via USB interface. So basically, you can discover the printer and you can select a USB connected printer, and then you can print again the ZPL to that printer. So similar really to the Bluetooth API, but specifically for USB. And it's on my list to actually do another blog which will cover the USB printing, because some people, you're in a very secure environment, a USB connection might be preferred over a wireless connection anyway. So that could work better. Wi-Fi printing, we also support. So the simplest way to do the Wi-Fi printing is just to open a socket to the printer, a WebSocket, and print directly to the printer that way. Obviously, if you do that, again, you'll have minimal error checking. But basically, when you're using a mobile printer, the user prints a label and it doesn't come out, then they know that it's not being printed anyway, because they have the printer. They normally have it on a shoulder strap or on a holster. So yeah, you don't need to have a lot of error checking necessarily. If you did want full error checking and to be able to detect things like the print cover being open or the paper being out, then you could use the Print Connect driver, which is on Google Play, which we have available to support both USB and network connections, either through a Wi-Fi or through a wired network. So that gives you more capability, but it's also slightly more complex interface. You have to use an intent interface to use that from Enterprise Browser. Enterprise Browser does support intents. You see the intent API there. So you can do that. It's just quite a bit more complex to set up the printer if you're using Print Connect than if you just do a direct connection to the printer. But the choice is there if you wanted to do that.
Okay. We did share the links here in the chat also, so that everyone has accessibility to the links that you shared during this session, including this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you, Ian, for walking us through that. Very interesting and good information. I'm looking forward to that next blog that you mentioned on printing for USB.
Yeah.
And then we have one additional question, which is, which other useful APIs are available in addition to the print barcode and RFID?
Yeah. So again, going back to the list, you can see the full list here. There's a lot here which are maybe a bit more esoteric and not commonly used, but some of the ones which I've found useful are the NFC. So if you need to do NFC tag reading, you can do that in a pretty straightforward way with Enterprise Browser. We mentioned earlier RFID and barcode. You can do things like the signature capture in a simple way. We have a camera API. You can also use the standard HTML camera API as well. So yeah, there's a lot of capability that you can access in a pretty straightforward way through JavaScript functions within an enterprise browser application. And that's one of the differentiators really between using enterprise browser and trying to use a standard browser like Chrome. Obviously, you don't have that API set. If you use a web development tool, you can add some of those APIs, but I think this is probably a more extensive list of APIs than you'd have normally with other development tools.
Okay. All right. So this, I think there is another question and another couple questions in the chat here. Is it possible to generate ZBI apps for the printers as well?
VBIF.
No, ZBI apps.
ZBI.
Yeah.
Yeah, so question. I have actually tried using GenAI to create a ZBI app. One of the issues is, so GenAI is using a model that's built on information that exists on the web, and there aren't actually that many samples of ZBI on the web. So for people who may not have heard of ZBI, it's the Zebra basic interface, and it is a basic language that you can use on the printer as an interpreter on the printer, and you can build and run your own applications written in ZBI. But from what I've seen, because there's not that many samples on the web, it's not that good at generating code if you use ChatGPT, for example. So certainly wouldn't discourage people from trying it, but I don't think, in my experience, it's not really producing something that's going to be useful. And it is one of those cases where it does a good job of hallucinating and making up things that it doesn't actually know. So in that case, it will give you something that looks like it might work, but it's actually just basically made something up and it's not going to work at all. So you have to be pretty careful with the output if you try and use that. Whereas with ZPL, it seems to do a really good job, probably because there's a lot more ZPL code examples out there. And what I've found actually is you can even do something like take an image of a label, upload it into your chat interface, and then say, give me the ZPL that generates this label. So you can reverse engineer a label if you don't have the access to the original label design using that method. And it's not going to be perfect, what it generates, but it certainly will give you the basics of the ZPL that you need in order to recreate that label format.
Okay, thank you, Ian. There's one last question here in the chat. It says, is there an OCR API? A customer wants an OCR, some unnumbered on packages.
Yeah, so there isn't a direct OCR API, but what you can do is, because we can easily link or listen to an intent coming from Data Wedge, you can set up a Data Wedge profile for OCR. So if I just show you the device quickly, I go into Data Wedge on here. I can create a new profile. Let's call it OCR. Oops. And when I edit that, I can just go into the workflow and then enable, say, freeform OCR. And I can select whether to use the imager or the camera. Camera, I think, works best for OCR. And yeah, you can basically set up a profile. You could attach it to Enterprise Browser. And then within Enterprise Browser, if you refer to the blog that I was talking about earlier, which talks about RFID and barcode input from Data Wedge, that same technique will work with OCR data as well, because it's just basically text data that's being returned from Data Wedge. So the way it would work is that you would set up your OCR profile. if you need it only to be operating on a particular input field, you can switch the data wedge profile through the intent API that we have available that we can call through Enterprise Browser. So we can switch on the OCR profile. We can then activate data wedge to capture the OCR data, and then the decoded data will come back through an intent, which you listen for in your Enterprise Browser app, and you'll be able to receive the OCR data that way. So it is actually relatively straightforward to do that through data wedge. And as I say, have a look at that previous blog, which covers RFID and data wedge, and the same technique will work for OCR.
Sounds great. All right, thank you, Ian. Sounds like we have a lot of resources in our blogs that we can also reference, and forums on our developer portal. So really appreciate your sharing this information with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.